Coming up on This Week in Computer Hardware, Gigabit Internet, Intel's Core i7-5960X. That's 8 cores of awesome people. NETGEAR's Nighthawk X4, AMD R9 285, the FX updates and price drops, and how long does thermal compound last anyhow? All this and more. It's all coming up next on TWiCH. This is TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 283, recorded on September 4th, 2014. 16 cores, people. No waiting. Welcome to TWiCH, This Week in Computer Hardware, TWiCH's weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most informative, most exciting, most delightful, most charming, and most chocolate-covered news about computer hardware. PCs, we love them. Windows, we live on it. OS X, we talk about that too. And today, there will be no phones because, quite frankly, my partner in crime, Ryan Shrout, is overphoned after the week of announcements at IFA or IFA.
You know what? I honestly haven't even really been able to pay attention to the phones because there's so much happening like in the world of just actual like normal PC hardware components that I haven't been able to pay attention. I'm gonna dedicate like Friday through Monday to kind of pay attention to that stuff, and we'll see.
I feel
we'll see what happens next week.
Yeah, no, it's been kind of crazy. There is one thing I will mention later on because I think it is your least favorite mobile announcement in the history of mobile.
Okay.
But we should probably talk about something you're excited about. 8-core i7-5960X Haswell E gets some jump. This thing is what, stupid expensive? Or stupid reasonable. I mean, we're talking about $1,000 down to like $389. So it's not entirely stupid in pricing. Apparently,
well, if you want the 8-core processor, it's stupid expensive. Yeah, I mean the Core i7-5960X is the 8-core version, 8-core 16-thread. Right. It's $1,000, $999, whatever you want to call it. It is the Extreme Edition part, right? The one that Intel has, you know, for the last 8 years. Or so has been the $1,000 processor, whatever their flagship Extreme Edition part happens to be, is $1,000, and this is it. And it's impressive if you can afford it. If you want to,
it's kind of funny. We did in honor of your low cost gaming machine build. We built, you know, basically a $380 gaming machine because we also had a few requests on Die-Try, and they're like, you know, I want to wall hang a PC. So, you know, did some lashing, we did some screwing, we ended up with a complete PC on a board hanging on a wall because, you know, paracord and PCs are perfect together. And it was really funny because we had some reactions that were like, oh, you should use, you know, this AMD part. We were like, go read the PC per article, or oh, you need more of this, go read the PC per article. And the really interesting one was somebody was like, hey, could I use this to run you know, Illustrator or some of the other CS6 programs? And this processor, if you are running all of the Photoshop or all of the Premiere, like this is the processor you've been waiting for. It's a consumer sort of 8-core processor. It'll run 16 threads. So if you have the giant multi-threaded application of Doom, this is the processor that will actually speed it up, at least if the bottleneck is multiple threads. So that's kind of exciting.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at some of the benchmark pages, like the video transcoding, the rendering, you know, the stuff that is very heavily threaded and very easily threaded, at least on the rendering side. I mean, you see significant jumps over, you know, the quad core or the 6-core parts that are already out there, right? If you look at, so this is Haswell E. It is the same core architecture that is in the, you know, the 4000 series parts shipping today. You know, the 4770K, the 4790K, those are Haswell. They're quad-core 8 threads instead of 8-core 16 threads. Now, if you look at something like Devil's Canyon, that's a very low-cost part compared to the 5960X. It's like $350 or something like that, $330. And it has half the cores, but it also runs at a little bit higher, actually runs at a significantly higher clock speed. So the base clock of Devil's Canyon is excuse me, 4 gigahertz, while the base clock of the new 5960X is 3 gigahertz. So I mean, you're talking about a 25% drop in frequency, but you're doubling the number of processing cores. So that kind of gives you an idea right away of like heavily threaded applications are going to see a really big boost, anywhere from 30 to 80%, you know, 30 to maybe 75% in those applications. But if you look at, say, if you look at the page titled rendering and scientific, and you look at that very first graph, it's actually a Cinebench test, which is a rendering application. But the single threaded result demonstrates that, hey, you know, if you are doing a lot of single threaded applications, and for whatever reason the programs you're using are single threaded, that, you know, you can get a better performance out of a 4790K, out of a 4770K, out of a 4670K, you know, and on down the line. It's still a good part. It's decent. It's reasonable, and you can run a bunch of single-threaded applications at the same time and get optimal performance out of them. So it really comes down to what your workload is. Now, you alluded to the other series of, you know, the other parts in this family. The 5960X is the $1,000 part. The 5930K is $580. And then the 5820K is $380, which, as an aside, Micro Center. So Intel didn't send us a 5820K. I went up this past weekend and bought one at Micro Center near me, and they were selling that 5820K for $299. So for $80 or $90 less than kind of what the box price is. That's whatever it is. That's what Micro Center does. That's their shtick. Both of those other SKUs have 6 cores instead of 8. But they do have higher clock speeds. So your single-threaded performance is going to be a little bit better. Your multi-threaded performance is going to be a little bit worse. And you kind of have your trade-off there. Also note that these are 140-watt TDP parts, all of the Haswell E, while the Haswell CPUs are 88 watts. So that's a pretty big difference there as well. It's a really interesting thing. Like, I have the 5820K. We're going to do a review of that. It has 6 cores, 12 threads. It has 28 lanes of PCI Express integrated on it. The other 2 Haswell E processors have 40. So what does that actually mean for the consumer? Probably not much in terms of what you're actually going to do with your system. 28 lanes is still, you know, 12 more lanes than you get on a standard Haswell CPU. So you could in theory do 3-way SLI with a by 8, a by 8, a by 8, and have 4 lanes left over for like a PCI Express SSD or an M.2 PCI Express SSD, something like that. And I think that would address almost every user's use cases, right? So I also do think it's funny that the 40-lane parts have 5 connection ports, which means they could technically support 5 by 8 PCI Express lane configurations. So in theory, you could put 5 graphics cards in one of these motherboards if the motherboard, you know, was laid out in a way to support it. I don't know what you do with that, but you could put 5 GPUs in a system if you wanted to now. So,
well, it was funny. We had like the world's one of the stories that came across this morning. That's going to be, you know, that's going to be showing up at IDF next week is you know, the world's fastest DDR4, right? So that whole I'll call it FURA.
Sure.
You know, we have the world's fastest DDR4, right? Despite the fact that even X99 isn't going to help us all that much in terms of distributing between like a 3600. Yeah, there it is. The G-Skill releases world's fastest DDR4 3333 megahertz memory, available now. You know, and it's I kind of laugh because, like, you know, we're getting back into sort of hyping stuff that's not going to really, you know, help your performance all that much. And there's something I'm trying to say here. It was really funny. Like, one of the comments we had on that article was somebody's like, we did a sort of an entry to one of the interns here was horrified at the sight of my gaming PC, the RIP monster with all of the DVD drives in it, and took it upon himself to rewire the case, to do cable management on it. So that's another diatribe we just posted with, like, how to do cable management, because he literally put a note on the side of the case that said, "This is wrong. This is not acceptable."
Hey, it's nice to have people that'll take that upon themselves to do it, I guess.
You know what? If he's got a little anal retentive thing going and my PC case freaked him out, more power to him. I'm actually in the process of now getting all the DVD drives to work again, but that's a whole nother conversation. But one of the comments, like the third comment on the video, was, I can't believe you only have a Core i7-920. It's time to update. And I started looking at the benchmarks, and it's like, I'm gonna have to drop somewhere between $300 and $500 or $700 on a new processor and motherboard. Probably at least $350, probably as much as $500, to do somewhere between a 30 and 50% gain in performance over my current processor. And it's funny, right? It's a Core i7-920 is a 4-year-old processor, and it's amazing how because the processors have been so fast for so long, it's kind of amazing how long you have to wait, or what kind of that was a $1,000 machine, which for me is a lot of money for a gaming machine a few years ago. And it's still, it's taken like 4 or 5 years where I'm going to have to spend $500 to $700 to get a 50% or greater performance boost. So I'll wait another year and I'll get that 50% performance boost for like $300 a motherboard and processor. But it's, I'm kind of with you. It's neat to see something where they've kind of gotten unhinged, where it's like, how many cores can we give it to you if you'll pay for all of them? And, now I just want to see 16 cores available in a $300 part. So, Intel, get on that.
I will say, so this, like you mentioned, it's DDR4 memory. So we've talked about X99, the X99 chipset and all that before. That's going to be more expensive, initially as well. If you look at like synthetic Sysoft Sandra benchmarks, the performance differences, the memory bandwidth differences are there. But as with all kind of system memory increases, whether it be higher clocks through technology, the application performance differences are going to be very minimal, especially considering you're kind of, with DDR4, you're trading higher bandwidth for higher latency, right? So you're losing a little bit on latency performance and gaining a little bit on the bandwidth performance. So there will be some applications that may actually do really, really, really slightly worse if they're very memory latent bound, as opposed to memory bandwidth bound. So that's something to keep in mind as well. But there's literally, if you want the fastest enthusiast system, this is it. Like there's, I'm not trying to like sugarcoat it or say, some applications it's the best and some it's not. It's, if you have a single threaded application, it's not going to be the fastest. But for the rest of the world, that you're not ever really doing just one thing, it's going to be incredible. I'll also mention the overclocking side of it, right? So again, this review is only of the 5960X, which is the 8-core version, and it runs at a base clock of 3 gigahertz, and I think it has a top, out of the box turbo clock of 3.5 gigahertz. I was able to overclock it. I was using the Asus X99 Deluxe motherboard, which is a really nice board, and I was able to get 4.6 gigahertz on all 8 cores all the time, and it was able to run stable. That was at about 1.3 volts on the chip. So you're talking about taking all 8 cores from a base clock of 3 to an overclocked speed of 4.6. So more than 50% clock speed increase over the base.
Wow,
right?
That's a big deal.
Yeah, and what it does is, if you look at those heavily multi-threaded benchmarks like Cinebench, your score increases 35 to 36% over the stock version of the processor, right? So you are seeing, so not only are you getting the gains of that processor compared to the competition already, now let's add 36% more on top of that, and you start to see some really, really impressive performance differences. For example, on that Pavre result that Burke just showed, the Ivy Bridge E flagship, the last generation of kind of like the Enthusiast, had a score of 2006 in Pavre, while this heavily overclocked, admittedly overclocked score of what was it? 3668 is actually 82% faster than Ivy Bridge E. So again, you're comparing a stock processor to an overclocked processor, but 82%.
Right. But I'm at this point now, I'm suddenly excited about overclocking again in a way that I haven't really been in a couple of years. You know what I mean? Like, whoa, what?
Yeah, I've only I'll tell you the sneak peek of the 5820 is with the 5820K so far I've only been able to get 4.5 gigahertz to be perfectly stable. So 100 megahertz less, even though you also have 2 less cores, right? So, but you're still taking it from a base clock of 3.6? No, 3.3 to 4.5. So now you're in the 40% clock speed increase, 30 to 40% clock speed increase for that. But again, that's the $380 processor, and you still get all the other benefits of the additional PCI Express lanes and DDR4 memory support and all that. So I think
not all the cores.
Correct. Yeah, right. Well, so, that $1,000 part has always been the dream processor, and it's always been, the Core i7-920 to the 3820 to the 4820 down to the 5820 is kind of the one that we would recommend to a mass audience.
Right. We should probably also take a moment here to talk a little bit about DDR4, because one of the things, I was going on the Amazon link from the site, and it's kind of funny when you click on the link from the PC Per write-up, brings you to Amazon's where it does a search for like 16 gigabyte, 32 gigabyte, 64 gigabyte. So you're talking about when you're building one of these systems, right? So 200 plus for an X99 motherboard, $385 to $1,000 for that processor, and then 4 DIMM DDR4 kits. So at the entry level, right, you're looking at 16 gigabytes for $239. When you start looking at what's kind of exciting, if you're a Photoshop jockey, if you spend your life, in Premiere, where you're looking at wait a minute, 32 gigabyte kits, but then you're up to, $500, 64 gigabyte kits are a heart-rending or heart-stopping or heart somethinging, 851, $700 to $800. I know that's DDR3 for $700 for 64 gigs. So yeah, DDR4, you're looking at a pretty healthy $859 expenditure. Now, if you bill by the hour and you render things out constantly, or you're working with huge files, and every minute you don't spend watching the beach ball bounce is another minute you get to earn money, that's something you can write off as an expense. But DDR4 is not cheap by any stretch of the imagination. That's the thing. I texted you a week ago. I was like, I'm spending $40 for 4 gigabytes of RAM for this $400 gaming machine, and you're like, yeah, go look at DDR4, dude. And I did, and it was heart stopping then, and it's heart stopping now. These are badass motherboards, and these are badass memory configurations that you're going to pay a ton of money as DDR4 comes online and becomes, you have to produce all of the DDR4 to drop the price on DDR4. So the margins,
also keep in mind, in the not too distant future, you will be able to buy 16 gigabyte DIMMs, which means you'll be able to have 128 gigs in these platforms.
Yeah.
So there's that too. So you can do 16 times 8 instead of 8 times 8. I'm still waiting on Corsair. Supposed to send me an 8x8 kit to play around with and do some testing on, and I'm still waiting for that to show up. 64 gigs of memory in a platform
if you're listening,
like that.
Of course not. Corsair, pardon me.
Yeah, I'm watching.
AMD 2014, oh my goodness. AMD 2014 FX refresh, FX 9590, 8370, and 8370E. Josh wrote the review up for PC Per, which brings us back to the subject of 8 cores, this time with AMD.
This is going to be a much shorter story for us to discuss.
Uh-oh.
The problem for AMD is, it's kind of weird. Like, we posted a video on YouTube about Haswell E, and somebody else, lots of people said, well, if you want 8 cores, you can get it for $229 instead of $1,000. And that's
all cores are not equal. All cores are not equal.
Not only that, but many people don't even consider the 8-core processors that AMD makes to be truly 8 cores, because they only have 4 floating point units. They're 2 cores, 1 module. They have separate integer units. They share floating point units. Whatever, right? It's a totally different discussion. But that being said, like, the FX 9590 is a good part. They finally lowered the price to someplace where it could be competitive. It's going to be $229 instead of where it launched at, which is like $850, I think. But it draws 220 watts, which is 80 watts more than what the Haswell E draws. And if we look at performance, which we will do because I have the 9590 here, I mean, it's not going to be close, right? The Haswell E is going to be significantly faster. However, there is that argument to be made that if you're on a budget and you have some applications that are very heavily threaded, and you can definitely use all 8 threads, and you're not very worried about, how much power you're drawing, and you already kind of have like that self-contained water cooler, you don't have to worry about going out to buy one specifically for it. $229 is a pretty good deal for the amount of technology you get. But again, that's not even a new part. That's just kind of the price drop. What AMD launched that was new was the FX 8370 and the FX 8370E, which is supposed to be like a more energy efficient version, like a more tightly bend part. The problem is the 8370 only increases clock speeds over the 8350 that's been out for like more than 2 years now, by 100 megahertz. And performance scales exactly as you would expect. The 8370E does okay in single thread applications, but when you get into the heavily, like when you're trying to use all of those cores, the base clock speed of that processor is significantly lower in order to maintain a lower TDP than the base 8370. And as a result, its performance is noticeably lower as well. So, it's unfortunate because AMD doesn't control their own manufacturing now. They don't get to do like special tweaks and special runs for their parts like they used to do, 4, 5, 6, 10 years ago. They're still building these parts on 32 nanometer technology. They never moved to 28 for their primary CPUs. Intel's on 22. Intel's getting ready to release 14 this holiday season in Broadwell. And the desktop, like the enthusiast platform, the FX chipsets, like the 990 FX chipset, which is really just the 880 FX chipset, has been around since like 2011, 2010, and it's starting to show its age. They've lowered prices. They're intelligent enough to know that they're not going to compete at the $400 price point. So, you can kind of look at where they're at in terms of price based on where they believe their competitive performance metrics will lie, right? So the 9590 at $229 is very compelling. It uses a lot of power, but it's a fairly powerful processor as well. The 8370 is only $30 less and is significantly lower on that performance scale as well. So I don't know.
I'm feeling kind of sad here. I mean, this is not exactly a new feeling for me when we talk about AMD CPUs.
Yeah.
Emails full of vitriol, but it's there's some cool things going on here, but it sounds like they're generating the 8-core processors for loyal enthusiasts, not necessarily for people looking for an actual hardcore performance experience.
Yeah, I would agree. Like, and they're just doing what they can for now, right? They're working on other stuff. They have other cores. They brought in the right people to do other cores. But we have to wait. It's something that takes a long time, and in the interim, they're trying desperately to put their best foot forward, I guess, is what I'll say. So,
well, on the upside, we have some exciting or significantly more exciting news from AMD Radeon R9 285 2 gigabytes graphics card review. I'm 3 weeks away from having my braces out, and apparently my teeth are broken. This is a much happier AMD story.
This is right. So they don't have the same problems on their GPU side that they do on the CPU side. Their GPUs are very competitive against NVIDIA's. They're actually better in terms of price or performance per dollar. The 285 is an interesting part because it is actually a new GPU. It's actually a new piece of silicon. It's a GPU called Tonga, and it kind of combines the feature set from the 290 and the 290X. The features like true audio support, XDMA crossfire, bridgeless crossfire, support for the FreeSync technology whenever it becomes available, as well as the updated PowerTune technology for clock scaling. So those types of features that existed in the 290 and the 290X in Hawaii GPU, merged with the kind of price performance level of the existing 280 line, which was actually based on the Tahiti GPU that came out in December of 2011, right? So the 280 and the 280X are parts that are basically the exact same GPU that existed in December 2011 as the 7970 and the 7950. So what they have done essentially is they've actually done some other things. They've actually tweaked the architecture quite a bit, improved efficiencies. They actually shrunk the memory bus width and took you from 3 gigs of memory to 2 gigs of memory. Both of those things are negatives, right, if you look at it from a specification standpoint, but the efficiencies they added in the GPU actually make it so the 285 and the 280 basically perform identically, right? And the 285 is replacing the 280. The 280 is going to go away here in the next couple of weeks. Whatever stock is out there is kind of all that's left. So the 285 it's $249, which is reasonable, I guess, except for the fact that the 280 had already, over the last several weeks, kind of been selling for like $239, $229. It had been a little bit lower than that, and especially now that it's kind of on the way out the door and everybody knows that the prices are lower as well. So it's hard to be really excited about the 285 from my point of view, because it's an existing performance envelope. It's an existing price envelope, and neither of those things drastically change. Instead, what has changed is kind of the inner workings of the GPU, right? So true audio may be cool one day. FreeSync may be cool one day. XDMA crossfire, not that big of a deal anymore, because AMD has, since the Catalyst 14.1 driver had actually fixed crossfire and all the stutter issues and whatever that they had in the previous generations. So it's more of like, to me, it seems more like a housekeeping type release. Like, oh, hey, if we're going to release FreeSync monitors at CES, it would be really nice if the majority of our GPUs could support it, right?
Right.
Because if they had a FreeSync monitor for sale today, you could only use it on the 290, 290X and the 260X or whatever, but not really like an enthusiast gaming card. The 270, 270X, 280, 280X would not be able to run it. And that's kind of, that's a problem. So, I think what we'll see is the 285 release that happened this past week. I think you'll see a 285X. You'll probably see like a 275 and a 275X, or maybe just one of those two. But they need to kind of refresh their product line to support these features so that they can kind of move forward for whatever their next step is on their GPU line. But, I mean, it's a good card. We were talking about on the podcast, and I listening to myself then, and I listen to myself now, and I feel like I'm being really negative towards it. It's a really good card. It's just not super exciting. Like when the 750 Ti was released, it was an existing performance envelope, but they drastically lowered the price and drastically lowered the power consumption at that performance envelope. And the 285 doesn't really do that. It doesn't really make those changes. So it is kind of just a part, right? A good part, but just a part.
And in our cavalcade of AMD news, AMD is dropping the R9 295X2 price to $1,000 should you have forgotten. Scott, by the way, wrote this up. Should you have forgotten the R9 295 X2? Basically, there's 2 models available, at least on Newegg. One on Amazon selling for as much as $1,200. Essentially, it's a water-cooled R9 295, which is, you know, all of this GPUs in one slot for giant piles of money. You know, basically, it's a dual GPU design. It's water cooled, or excuse me, liquid cooled. It comes with a complete liquid cooling system. It's ready for 4K. Should you have a 4K monitor you want to feed all of the pixels to, yeah. So there's that.
It's a $500 price drop. Went from $1,500 to $1,000 in one day.
Call me crazy, but does that signify that they've got a whole bunch sitting in inventory and nobody's buying them? Or do you think they suddenly had a massive increase in yield and a reduction in the cost of water coolers?
No, you know, they definitely didn't sell as well as they had hoped, right? Mm-hmm. When I went to Micro Center to buy that processor, actually, like, there were 5 or 6 of them in the case. Right. And the Gigabyte ones had clearance stickers on them. I didn't even ask what the price was, but that's not a good sign. But I also think they may be reacting to all those rumors about NVIDIA having a new GPU coming out later this month. And they're trying to say, well, whatever that part is going to be, if it's a super high-end flagship part, well, now we've just taken our flagship part, cut the cost by 33%. Now what are you going to do about it? Kind of preemptively there, because I don't think AMD has anything itself rolling out very soon on that department. So I don't know.
Anything you can do, I can do more expensive. Anything you can do, I can drop the price on to move the market. There's one story I want to drop in here before we kind of move on to some different subjects. This kind of blew my mind. It came through the news feed today, and Jeremy wrote this up fast for PC Per, that Dell has resolved to have the most pixels ever, a 5,120 by 288 pixel desktop monitor. And my head's kind of shaking here, because essentially we are now beyond desktop monitors doing sort of retina displays. It's a Dell, it's an ultra sharp 27, an ultra HD 5K monitor. So again, let me say that one more time: 5120 by 2088 or 2,888 pixels, $2,500 in time for Christmas. Quote, just under 6.5 million more pixels in 4K. Which I agree with Jeremy, should look very interesting on a 27K display or 27-inch display. I'm actually looking at 3 Dell monitors right now. We got in one in 1080p, one in QHA, and one in 4K that are both all around 27-inch desktop monitors. And I gotta say, this is crazy pants in a good way. Yes, you will need. Maybe this is why AMD dropped the price on those 295 X2s, so you could actually pump all of the pixels you need into a 5K monitor. Other than that, it looks like a standard Dell UltraShop, which, by the way, the glass is looking really good on these. And if you don't have $2,500 for a 5K monitor, trust me, there are some significantly less expensive options out there from Dell. And I will also say that I'm still a huge fan of Dell's refurb sales at the Dell outlet. Because
I don't even know what you do with that resolution. Sorry, I just like
photo editing. Or photo editing, and possibly, you know, kind of one of the classic things for ridiculous high resolution monitors was if you are a banking institution where you are dealing with massive amounts of information across multiple displays, as those displays age and start to disintegrate, you replace them with a single higher resolution monitor. Or maybe Dell did it just because they're privately held now and they can do stupid cool products just to prove that they are the Dell we grew up with and not the Dell that was beaten half to death by Wall Street. There you have it.
Done. Exactly.
While we're talking about insane products, and I say this with love and affection, NETGEAR announces the Nighthawk X4 AC2350 router. Just because you couldn't get the performance you thought you'd get out of AC1900, we're going to have AC2350. So while we're talking about products of excess and enthusiasm, let's talk about NETGEAR's new Nighthawk X4 AC2350 router. Just because you couldn't get any performance increase to your 802.11b laptop off AC1900, we're going to do something more excessive and out of control. That might not entirely be true. It's funny. I've been playing with some of the latest routers, these $200, $250 routers, and it is an interesting story that I will not even attempt to dissect in this particular evening. But the X4 AC2350 Scott's got the write-up at PC Port, dual band with up to 1,733 megabits per second of bandwidth. It is 4 channels of 433 megabits per second on 5 gigahertz and up to 600 megabits per second, 3 channels of 200 megabits per second on 2.4 gigahertz. Quote, compared to the Nighthawk X6 released earlier this year, the X4 is designed for fewer users who demand more performance. 2 processors, a dual-core Qualcomm, quote, Snapdragon-based, which is actually, Scott's pretty right about this, unclear and misleading. Snapdragon DNA with dual crate cores is the quote, I believe, from
Yeah, that's kind of weird, isn't it?
It is extremely weird. So it's basically from their Qualcomm Internet Processors line, not to be confused. It's weird, right? So it's not really comparable, Scott notes, to a system on a chip from their mobile lineup. And then NETGEAR offered a second dual-core processor clocked at 500 megahertz that is dedicated to deal with Wi-Fi-related tasks as an offload, which is an interesting idea, right? Because there's a lot going on in routers these days as they get faster and more sophisticated. Quote, the reason why I found this interesting was that not too many years ago, routers did not advertise their processor and RAM. There was once a niche who would create their own routers out of old PCs and the x86 compatible firmware like OpenWRT, or Smoothwall, or Monofol, or pfSense. The push was to cheap routers with high bandwidth ratings. When I asked NETGEAR at what point did the industry decide to take internal hardware seriously, the response was that about 73% of customers are repeat buyers. They upgraded their router because they were not happy with the performance that they were getting. So this is interesting, right? Because HD videos are going to multiple devices in the home. They're going to, you know, when you've got like Netflix running on 3 set-top boxes, a couple of televisions, and maybe a laptop plus video, or soon be plus audio streaming plus backups, the challenges to a router get really, really ugly. Dynamic QoS is kind of interesting. That extra processing power can be used to allocate bandwidth dynamically to different streams. So I think it's some interesting stuff going on. This like 2 USB 3.0 ports, 1 eSATA port. So they're obviously thinking about this for streaming and or backups. $279.99, which is officially makes it the most expensive consumer router I have ever seen, unless you count rolling your own pfSense router on like a Core i3 or Core i5 box.
Yeah, that doesn't count. That doesn't count.
I don't think so, but that's...
It's expensive. Like these high-end routers are getting up there, and it's interesting because it reminds me very much of kind of like the power supply race that we had, right? Where all of a sudden everybody, like one day somebody sat up and said, we kind of need high quality power supplies. And everybody was like, oh, we can definitely do that. And we saw the price increases, features and power and performance increased as well, but prices went way up. And I feel like that's where we're at with this as well. Although this will come up a little bit later when we get into our first or second question from the audience. We'll talk about that then.
What's going on with Matrox?
I don't know. I don't know anymore. Matrox is a company that effectively has 0.0 rounded % market share. They sell about 7,000 units a quarter. They used to be one of the dominant players in video cards, display adapters, and graphics cards, competing up there with 3DFX and STB and all those guys. They just announced that they were, they were announced they will use an AMD GPU on their upcoming product line, which is the first time that they will, they will do anything like that. It's kind of an interesting. I don't know if it's a first necessarily for AMD, because they're going, they have lots of partners, but never have they had partners that I can recall that had actually previously made their own GPUs and sold them. They said let's see, Scott wrote this up, I think, says they didn't mention the specific processor. They note that the selected AMD GPU will be a 28 nanometer, 1.5 billion transistors, 128-bit memory bus. It kind of has to be the Cape Verde, unless it is some kind of unannounced GPU, which I don't think it is. It's Cape Verde XT you're looking at. It's an HD
Right.
7770 gigahertz edition or so, right? But keep in mind that Matrox target is not. It has not been for a long time the gamer. It is more of the professional. So my guess is that you'll see these cards come out with, the maximum number of display heads possible on them, probably 6 on these cards.
Mhm.
And they are going towards that multi-head user, the business user, the financial guys.
Right.
They're just going to have somebody else's intellectual property sitting on that board instead of their own now. So,
The mind reels with possibility. I don't know. Time changes.
Yep, it apparently does.
I gotta mention before we get into one last delightful case, because this has been a case-free show. Ryan's least favorite Intel product ever, I think, was one of the many announcements this week that dropped during IFA. There's been a ton of Samsung phones. The Samsung Note 4 is one of the big ones people are talking about. But Intel has revealed a lovely write-up, by the way, on PCMag.com. It's Bejeweled Smart Bracelet, the Mica. And there were a couple Android watches that were announced this week. But this, I think, really kind of says it all. If you looked at the Pebble and thought to yourself, I'm not wearing that. It's not sophisticated enough. It reminds me of the worst elements of a Swatch from the 80s. You might be a candidate for the newest, quote, smart bracelet. Going to be revealed at the opening ceremony of the Spring-Summer 2015 fashion show during New York's Fashion Week, a place where I just don't think Intel has been represented enough. That what you just saw there, pull it back up again, Bark. Let's see Mica one more time. Those two lovely, elegant wrists are holding or suspending gracefully in air luminescently. I'm going to get my Walt Mossberg on here. Oh. Mica, those are Mica, my intelligent communication accessory. Quote, feminine fashion accessory with communications capabilities, and considered a landmark, at least by Intel, collaboration between Intel and fashion house opening ceremony, according to the announcement that Damon Poder wrote up at PCMag.com. It will be available at Open Ceremony's worldwide retail outlets and select Barney stores. I do miss a feminine accessory blending seamlessly into everyday life. Mica ushers in a new era, converging fashion and technology by integrating a woman's luxury accessory with technology in order to complement and enhance a woman's work and social life. Ironically, nice. That's a good Leo face. Ironically, Damon noted there wasn't a ton of information on the technological functionality of the smart bracelet ahead of its launch. But apparently, much like the Pebble and Android, where it will allow women to, quote, stay connected via SMS messages, meeting alerts, and general notifications delivered directly to the wrist. Wow. With additional features and functionalities to be revealed at a later date. So I don't know how I feel about Intel playing catch up with a new category of device that I just had to do that just to watch Ryan's face on the feed.
It just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, it would be fine if it were a third party using some Intel technology, but for it to be an Intel product, it's so out of left field for me. I don't know. I can't get behind it.
Maybe that's how they're going to get the Quark a beachhead in the Internet of Things.
Could be. Could be.
Twitch.tv is the email address if you want to send us an email. You can also tweet at Ryan Shrout or at Patrick Norton. And if you're curious, because this has been an actual case-free episode of This Week in Computer Hardware, which is something we haven't been doing a lot lately, kind of like earlier this year where we really couldn't do an episode without another 34 motherboards being announced by a single manufacturer. I got to say, this is perhaps the perkiest machine I've seen this year. The Corsair Graphite Mini ITX case review by Mr. Ryan Shrout. I want you to tell me that the top of this case is actually a handle and that you can carry it like a lunchbox to your next LAN party. It's so cute.
It is absolutely a handle.
Yes.
But it would be it's a slightly awkward lunch pail. But I mean the handle goes straight down into the structure of the device. Uh-huh. It can get pretty dense, right? You're getting a whole lot of hardware, and that's a Mini ITX platform. It kind of looks like a DeWalt like worksite stereo in my view.
It does.
But I like the color. I like I like the yellow. it's different, right? It stands out as not black or white or camo or whatever it is, right? It's interesting. The only thing I don't like, if you look at that picture up the top, my one gripe about this, show that picture again, Burke. On the far right-hand side of that front display, yeah, right there where the top controls are, that reset button in the far right there, yeah, it's like way too big and easily touched, and it feels exactly the same as the power button in the middle. So if you just kind of reach down there and hit a button, or if you got nosy kids or a nosy cat,
right?
I like my reset buttons to kind of be like recessed and hard to push accidentally.
Is the fan button on the left side of that panel, does it like pop out and allow you to adjust the fans up and down, or is it a sort of 1, 2, 3?
It's a It's a 3-speed
low,
fan
medium, and
controller.
high. Okay.
Correct.
Fan control.
Correct.
Huh. What's the pricing on it?
It's a little steep. I think it's $139 for it. I mean, it's a neat design. Watch the video rather than looking just through the pictures, because the video kind of shows like how the components fit in and everything. And it's not a perfect case, and it's not actually my favorite Mini ITX case from Corsair, really.
Right.
But it has interesting, like it has a dome light on the inside, like a switch that has like a little LED light on the inside that points on the motherboard. That would be perfect for working on it inside if you didn't have to have a system installed and plugged in and turned on for that light to work.
So you're saying it's mood lighting or accent lighting and not actual functional lighting?
That is exactly what I'm saying. Yes. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. What's going on with this question about, so there's gigabit internet is kind of one of the great challenges. We got an email question, I think, or one of the great desires. One of the things, Ryan and I would both like gigabit Ethernet, and we'd like not to pay $1,000 a month for it. You have it.
I have it.
It's business class internet. I'm talking about like gigabit internet to my house.
Well, I mean, it's an office condo, and it's through fiber, and it's through Cincinnati Bell. Cincinnati Bell is going to start offering it starting September 8th to consumers that have fiber to the house.
How much is it going to cost to consumers who have fiber to the house?
$89.99. Isn't that crazy? It's
sorry.
nuts.
There was just a reaction there that I just couldn't share on a family show like this.
It's nuts. If you bring up that TWI image thing, this was us testing it out the day we had it installed. It's the picture of the Steam library download. Burke, if you have that one available, I'd appreciate it. So what's interesting is that if you run a speed test through speedtest.net, I was only able to get like 491 down by, it's actually a gigabit, it's 1,000 down by 250 up, right? And so we're only able to get like 490. We crossed maybe 500 a couple of times on speed test on the downstream. But if you look at the Steam image there, we were actually downloading Max Payne 3 from Steam at 101 megabytes per second. Fast enough that our SSD had busy writing to disk pop up several times, where like it couldn't keep up with the 101 megabytes per second because it's really tiny, small writes to an SSD that confuse it. So we downloaded like the 27.3 gigabytes of Max Payne 3 in about 5.5 minutes.
Right. It's funny.
Earth shattering. It's I don't know. Go ahead.
No, it was funny because one of the things Robert Heron noticed in an email thread with a bunch of our friends was that he had unplugged his cable modem and plugged it back in, right? So if you have a cable modem and it's DOCSIS 3, and if you have a cable modem, hopefully it is DOCSIS 3 at this point, either because you bought a DOCSIS 3 modem or your cable company put it in there. And if they aren't running DOCSIS 3, find someplace else to get your internet. But if that's actually a possibility in your community. But his speed went up by like 50 or 70%, right? And I had a similar situation. I was paying for a faster class of internet because Comcast, who provides internet for both Robert and myself, is now bordering on running scared, right? When Cincinnati Bell is doing fiber's becoming part of the community. Other people are dropping their prices. It's been interesting to watch. All of a sudden, all of these companies are like, well, the pipes are too small and the trucks won't haul enough bits. And the truth is our technical economist is one of my least favorite phrases. It's something that AT&T invented a few years ago to write bogus reports for Congress critters and Senate critters. Who apparently couldn't figure this stuff out for themselves. But basically, like, the AT&T report from a few years ago, this technical briefing that was available to members of the American government said that, no. You thought you were buying X number of megabits per second, but what you were really buying, because this video thing, no. You were buying 30 megabits per second or 6 megabits per second or 2 megabits per second for the duration of loading a web page. And then you're done. It is not this 24-hour streaming. It is not even 2-hour-a-day streaming. If you really want this 24-hour availability of the bandwidth you think you bought, just because it says it on the bill every month doesn't mean we're actually planning on delivering it to you. You would actually have to pay $400 a month for a commercial account. And then there was this set of arguments that really basically said, we don't want to build out capacity to deliver the bandwidth you think you're buying. We'll give it to you 128K, half a megabit web page at a time. So it's really interesting to watch, as Comcast tries to buy like Time Warner and take over most of the universe and cement their place as owning, because Comcast right now wants to own like 30% of the households in the United States, and buying Comcast or merging, with Time Warner would do that. So it's crazy to sort of watch this battling start. And it's funny to watch Comcast suddenly be like, whoa, wait a minute. We probably should deliver the bandwidth we can already deliver, but aren't delivering, before all of these people realize that they can go somewhere else and get better performance for the same amount of money or less.
The funny part about this is, I know we've kind of gone off on a tangent here, is
sorry, I get tangent sometimes.
Well, I mean, it's all right. The reason Cincinnati Bell is doing this is because the Cincinnati City Council had 3 meetings to discuss when Google was selecting their most recent city, I forget which city it was, where Cincinnati City Council had, well, how do we organize this? How do we want to do this? How do we want to present this? And the Cincinnati Bell CEO came in and said, no. You don't want to do that. Let us do it. Keep it in a local company. We promise we'll have this percentage of the regional area done by this year, and then this percentage by the next year, and this percentage by the next year. And so they're keeping to that schedule so far. They didn't promise gigabit to everybody, but they promised fiber to 100 megabit fiber, kind of basically to everybody, I think within 6 or 7 years. Which would still be a great thing. And plus, I was talking with Cincinnati Bell guy about how the federal government is actually sending out tons of grants for people to wire rural areas. So even though I live in kind of the busy, bustling city of Florence, Kentucky, places that are many miles south of me, where there's 10 acres is a small lot and 100 acres is a normal size lot. Those houses have all been wired to support gigabit, because Cincinnati Bell is essentially being paid to do it, right? And it's a really interesting discussion to see how it works. I think I'm like the 10th person in the city to actually have it up and running and testing it. Like, I'm sending them hourly speed test results and kind of like beta testing a bunch of stuff. But I mean, the difference it makes is dramatic. Like, I don't have to worry about re-downloading games, like saving games from Steam anymore before I delete them. I just re-download them again, right? Like, the fundamental changes are dramatic, right?
Nothing. I'm just like, what data cap?
It's as fast as our local gigabit network inside the house, right? Or inside the office, right? We get about 110, 120 megabytes per second. And it takes a while for Steam it builds up to that when it actually hit the 101 megabytes per second, right? It took a while to get there, but it was still Steam, as it exciting to see. Yeah. But so anyway, that actually, if you want to go into our, I kind of reorganized the question there, that we had an email from John Mink who sent it to me. He's actually a Twit viewer, about gigabit internet, if you want to read that, because he talks about the routers and that whole aspect.
John writes in, Ryan and TWiCH G Plus Know-How Community or Google Plus Know-How Community, there was a post about getting the full gigabit on a gigabit internet connection. The user was getting approximately 400 to 450 megabits per second on the standard router, but managed to break 900 megabits per second once they swapped out their router and replaced it with a full PC running an OS specifically designed to be a router, but still run an x86. I don't know the testing methodology, but this could actually be an interesting benchmarking platform as people start looking around for how can I really get the gigabit I'm paying for. The other benefit I've seen from the PC as a router setup is handling many connections such as torrents. The router can easily get overwhelmed, whereas 4 college students, 3 of whom were networking engineering students, struggled to get the PC router to report CPU above 5%. Granted, we only had about 25 megabits, not 1,000, but it was also 2008. So when you throw X40 networking speed, it'd be interesting to see what load that places on a CPU. Can a 25-watt Sempron Kabini handle it, or will it take something like a Haswell? I don't think so. Also, can a Mobo NIC sustain gigabit interconnection, or does it saturate under load? Much of this comes to mind after building a NAS, only to find out that I can't skimp out on the CPU and the onboard NIC is wonky. So you're not the only one to find this quirk of gigabit networking, but I look forward to your insights on what is needed. Of course, I'm also looking forward to getting gigabit Ethernet. But that's another story. Yes, I too am looking forward to getting gigabit internet. I will say, especially if you're looking at something like pfSense, right? It's kind of the classic or sort of one of the primary x86 build your own router. Thank you. Brain just went to Pluto right there. Which essentially it's a custom distribution of FreeBSD that has been optimized to be a hardened router, right? So it's going to be a secure router to put between you and the world. And because you're putting on an x86 hardware, it's going to have scads of computational power to deal with whatever you're throwing at it. You should, however, hew very closely to the recommended hardware list for something like that. You know, if they tell you to buy an Intel Ethernet card, and you're like, oh, it's $29, buy the Delete XSplit of $29 card, and don't buy the $6 card from the commonly available and super awesome vendor on Amazon, because you don't want to spend a lot of time going, it doesn't work, it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and then after a month of piddling with settings, finally break down and buy the $25 card, suddenly discover, oh, you know, the performance was right there all this time. I just should have bought the part that they told me to buy.
It's interesting. I'm looking at the pfSense website, and for hardware, for CPU selection, it says if you are dealing with 500 plus megabits per second, you want server class hardware with PCIe network adapters, multiple cores at more than 2 gigahertz are required. It's bandwidth
and a lot of clients.
Yeah. and to be honest, that 100 megabytes of per second we're pulling from Steam, which is just over 800 megabits. We looked up, you know, your favorite site, Small Net Builder, where they did their benchmarks, and we're using the Asus AC66U router, and it benchmarked at about 815 megabits per second maximum throughput on the gigabit switch part of it, right? So now we're curious if we upgrade to a new router that, you know, from that website that gets closer to 950 megabits or whatever it is, you know, with its overhead, would we actually be able to go above the 101 megabytes per second that we saw in that result?
It's an interesting thought. And
yeah,
slightly kind of, you know,
our internet connection is maxing out the speed of the switch on a router. That's nuts, right? That's the future we all want. But now you find these weird new things that occur, like, hey, downloading from Steam at super fast speeds actually turns out to be a pretty good benchmark for SSDs and how they handle small writes. And we're looking at how do we integrate that into a benchmark suite in some capacity, right? It's a really interesting set of issues and concerns and cool things that have occurred since, you know, in the 48 hours we've had it installed, I guess.
And the day just gets better at Ryan's house. Yeah. By the way, shout out to smallnetbuilder.com. If you've never been there, go there. They are the premier source of reviews of NAS boxes and routers and wireless networking. And, you know, they're just doing the level of testing that really nobody does in this category anymore. And that's all that they do is stuff that relates to your network at some level. We got an interesting question from Jeff, who writes in, does thermal paste ever expire? Love the show. Thank you, Jeff.
Oh, wait, hold on. Wait. Who would ask such a dumb question? Am I right,
I don't think
Patrick?
that's a dumb question.
Oh, okay. All right.
But, I'm also someone who repeated the experiments involving things like mustard and mayonnaise as substitutes for thermal paste.
No toothpaste?
Although toothpaste, not so good. Diatomaceous earth.
Fair.
I'm trying to find the thermal paste mustard. Oh, there it is. I'm actually I'm a little heartbroken because I don't think hardwaresecrets.com still does the thermal paste, thermal compound roundup. Do you remember these?
I do, yeah.
A long time ago, back in like 2012, they actually did, and it's kind of funny because you of course probably didn't go in this direction, but I immediately thought, like, are we talking about thermal paste after it's been installed in between the heatsink and the CPU? Or are we talking about thermal paste in the tube? Yeah.
Hey, I found this tube in the drawer, and I have no idea how long it's been there. Does it deteriorate? And I tried to do some research before the show started, and most places say that yes, like the chemical compounds do eventually start to break down, but it's an incredibly slow process, like 5+ years before you have to start worrying about some of that, right? And it's interesting because when you apply a bunch of heat to it, like you do when you smash it between a processor and a heatsink, it accelerates that, right? So, if you've had thermal paste on a processor for 5 years, it's been on all the time, that might be something like an idea for you. Like, hey, this is a weekend project. Take off that heatsink, clean off the thermal paste, apply some fresh new stuff. I don't know if it'll help anything necessarily, but it won't hurt probably.
I will say I've had it separate, which is a truly disgusting experience when you like pull your, apparently ancient tube of Arctic silver out of your toolbox and go to, apply it to a CPU and have like a bunch of something that does not look like thermal paste come out of it.
Yeah.
And then discover that the rest of it's sort of congealed into a goopy mass that doesn't actually want to come out of the tube. I will say though, if you are a thermal paste enthusiast, or if you think to yourself, like, I need to spend $42 an ounce because this thermal compound says it's better. I really got to say, like the Hardware Secrets roundups were pretty amazing because one of the things when you looked at their chart when they put it together, and they spent a lot of time working on this, they gave you sort of the room temperature and the core temperature and the difference, and it can be kind of problematic because in some cases there's as much as a 13 or 14 difference in room temperature across sort of the entire thing. There were some others that they kept it more consistent by doing it in a room that was kept at like 20 degrees Celsius or something. But in some cases there was a pretty impressive, like when you look at mustard, toothpaste and chocolate. If you scroll down to the next chart, toothpaste and chocolate do not work particularly well as thermal compounds. Neither do butter. Butter after 12 hours actually is worse than fresh butter. But mustard actually is comparable. The mustard they use anyway is comparable and perhaps even better than some of the options that you would pay good money for. And it's kind of funny because when you look at mustard on that chart, right, it's that single line towards the bottom. Mustard is comparable, right? So that what you're looking at here is how many degrees Celsius hotter the CPU is than the air outside the case. So when you're looking at all of these, like it's 32 degrees Celsius up to 38 degrees Celsius. So that's a 6-degree range on the Celsius compound. And mustard, right? As in, sort of finely ground mustard you have sitting in your refrigerator right now, should you be a mustard enthusiast, is very, very close to products from, let's see, Acacia, Dow Corning, Evercool, Spire, StarTech, Tunic, Arctic, Nexus, Thermalright, Arctic Silver, EVGA. You know what I mean? There's some, and it actually performed better than Titan, Zerotherm, Rosewill, and then of course, do me a favor. Don't use lipstick, toothpaste, spray oil like Pam, butter. And then you get in like Rosewill, this bizarre TC060 Pro compound, which performs significantly worse than mustard, but slightly better than toothpaste, and significantly better. It's chocolate apparently is the worst possible thing you can use as a thermal compound, even worse than no thermal compound. But
it tastes the best, probably.
It probably does, but it's kind of funny. Like Arctic Silver 5, pretty badass.
We still use that.
Yeah, it's been my go-to for years now. But apparently, mustard is a distant second if things go sideways. But yes, actually, Jeff, thermal paste does expire. You just might never actually notice unless you spend a lot of time monitoring your machine, or you have a loud fan that doesn't start kicking on until about 3 years after. Probably, I'd probably say I don't think 5 years. I think probably would be a reasonable wait to start seeing the any kind of results or any kind of differences on your system. Yeah. In any case, we have wandered on for an extraordinary amount of time.
Indeed.
I would ask you what's coming up next week, but you and I will probably be both up to our ears in IDF and what we hope are announcements of the caliber of Micah. Because I don't think anything could be more exciting than watching you getting excited about, the latest in fashionable technology.
Make sure you go to the Internet of Things mega session, because maybe they'll hand one out to everybody that shows up.
I ain't betting money on that one, but now I'm suddenly wanting.
But maybe. You never know. You just don't know.
Probably give me something to track my milk carton as it moves around the house.
Yeah.
Internet of Things, ladies and gentlemen. Think of it as the Internet of Doom, as thousands and millions and trillions of new points of failure enter into the maintenance code.
But then think of the amazingness that will happen when we all get gigabit internet. So it's fine.
Everything will fail faster and it will be glorious. Yeah, you know what? Somebody tell Verizon to add some more connections to to Netflix, please. I think that's all I care about. Can I watch Netflix in 4K? And on that bright and cheerful note, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to remind you to please don't use butter as a thermal compound. And stay tuned next week. IDF coverage coming from Texilla and PCPer.com. I guarantee you the coverage will be more in depth on PCPer.com because they live and breathe hardware and they are awesome, and Ryan leads them. And by the way, one last thought before we go, a shout out to Anand of AnandTech.com, who hung up his benchmarking spurs this week, or took his benchmarking boots off, or choose the retirement metaphor of your choice. Apparently is going to work for Apple. I've known Anand since he was 15. He's 32 now. He's got 17 years in at AnandTech.com. And I think we will all be a little bit lesser for having him not be on the testing side of things. But I'm kind of excited to see what he ends up doing at Apple.
Yeah, I still don't know exactly what his role is or what his task is going to be there. But I know I see him every time I travel out of town for any kind of event or meeting. He is always there. So it will be interesting. It'll be disappointing to not have him there, but now I'm very curious to see what he does and what maybe I get to talk with him about going forward. So yeah, good luck to him.
Absolutely. I got to second that. But I'm also, a decade older than he is, and like, wait a minute, he's moving on to a new career. Maybe I should move on to a new career.
He's 2 months older than me. And I was like, well, damn it, Apple didn't offer me a job someplace. What the hell am I doing? Oh, well.
Do you really want to move to California?
I do not.
I think we've just solved that problem.
All right,
and with that, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for listening to Twitch This Week in Computer Hardware. You can get all of our episodes at twit.tv/Twitch. Email us twitch@twit.tv, and follow us on Twitter at Ryan Shrout, at Patrick Norton. At which point, I must say, I am at Patrick Norton, and I would like to thank you so much for listening. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout. See you guys.
Most awkward ending ever.